With this 124 big bore kit, I am also going to install these S&S piston oilers. So we're going to be doing that without, of course, splitting the cases or pulling the engine or anything like that. You can get to these and change them out, but you have to be very, very careful. Let's go over here and let me show you what's going on. So those are the piston oilers. Oh. To prepare these piston oilers, what I first do is I'll actually glue the gaskets onto the back so the gaskets don't fall off. Now you don't want to use anything that can get caught in these oil ports there or anything like that. Just a teeny dab of RTV, and I mean the tiniest little smear on the very ends. On the very ends. And that's it, which is away from the oil port. Just let it sit overnight and it'll cure, and now the gasket won't fall off, because you don't want the gasket falling off while you're in the middle of putting these on, because they will fall behind the flywheel, and then after that you got to pull the engine out. And trust me, I know what I'm talking about. So once the gaskets are glued on, it's the next day, everything's sealed and or dry I should say. Here's what I do. So the stock piston oilers are in there. You see they're right above the crankshaft. They're behind the rods. It's actually easier to take the pistons off the rods. In this case, I already took the pistons off anyways because we're going with big bore cylinders. But, and you can see in there what I got. There we go. I got some rope. Now this isn't a like a very fibrous rope. It's more of like a plasticky type rope. And I got it tucked in. Can't see it very well, but I got it tucked in behind the flywheel there. I can't get a good camera angle to see it. There we go. You can kind of see it a little bit back there. Let's see. Anyways, so the rope, and I got a couple layers of it. There we go. You can barely see it. Tucked in between the flywheel and the engine case, so if anything falls, it's just going to catch on that rope, and they can kind of go in there with a pick or a magnet and pull anything out. Now the rest of this I am going to fill with newspaper just to cover up all the rest of the holes. You don't want any accidents. Now as you can see, I got newspapers, even some blue shop towels in there. Covering every opening I could find. Of course, you got to remember to take all that stuff out and make sure you get it all out. I just have access to the piston oilers. There's some of the rope back there. And to make sure I get all the rope out, I leave a lot of extra slack, so I can just grab it and just yank it out once we're all done. So, okay. I'm going to put the camera down because I really want to focus on this. I want no mistakes. Okay, got them in. There's the rear one, there's the front one, the focus on it. But both S&S piston oilers are in. You can see just from the video here how hard that is. Tiny little Torx head screws, a gasket to deal with, you know, all sorts of areas that anything can kind of fall down to any little crevice. Yeah, it's not a fun job. There's no way around it. I just don't like doing those. But this one was successful. I've had others where I've messed up and dropped a gasket behind the flywheel and I had to pull the motor out. And actually just tipped the motor upside down, and after about a half hour it fell out. But I could see a situation where you have to split the cases if something gets stuck on there, you know, in the bottom end real good. But these went successfully, so I'm happy about that. Now we can continue with the preparation of the big bore cylinders and pistons. Now that the piston oilers have been installed in the bottom end, I repacked the The crankcase full of new, fresh newspapers to make sure everything is sealed up so nothing can accidentally drop into the bottom end while we're working with it. Right now we're going to unpack our pistons, piston rings, cylinders, and get all that prepped and ready for assembly. So let's get started. Okay. And I'll usually mark a line, mark which side's front, which side's rear, so I can keep everything organized. So let me get a marker. There we go. So just right down the middle here. Alright, so this side will be front, this side will be rear. That way we keep everything nice and organized. So, front piston rings, rear piston rings. Front piston clips, rear piston clips. And these beauties are the S&S 124 big bore pistons. Nice deep valve reliefs, forged design, coated skirts. It's a nice setup. Now they do say that these pistons aren't specific front to rear, but they do have a direction that they go. If I can get the camera to focus on it. Maybe not. Yep. Does that say it? There we go. Anyways, if you can see that, it says forward and has an arrow pointing to forward. And also it has a little dimple and it says cam next to it. So that's the camshaft side of the engine, so the right side of the engine. So we'll say this is the rear. This is the front. Let's get out the cylinders. And here are the big bore cylinders from S&S. Beautiful, solid design. The crosshatch is, of course, spectacular. Now, the way that they can get so much bore size and displacement off of a stock, engine, is this. You can see how thin that is. That cylinder liner that goes down into the cases is extremely thin. So they actually give you these stands to stand them on. They kind of slip over the cylinders like this. So you never want to put the cylinder down on that thin little skirt. So we got these cardboard stands, and we use that to set the cylinder down with. Okay, I went online and got the instructions from S&S, so now I'm going to just get everything written down, everything marked, so when I go do this, I don't have to stop and look around and look for more information. So like I said, I got everything divided from front to rear, so I'm going to mark everything front to rear with the marker just to make sure that nothing gets mixed up in the meantime. Now, the pistons are the same front to rear, but the cylinders are not. So the cylinders are different as far as the fin cutaway here, the thickness of the fins here to there versus this side. So they are front and rear this specific. So on the rear cylinder, I'll put a big old R, and on the front cylinder, I'll put an F. While I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to the pistons, just so I don't get those screwed up. I got to the piston rings laying on each side of their sheet here, forward and rear. The piston clips doesn't really matter so much. So Next, I'm going to write down on my work space here the ring end gap. So the top ring should have a gap of 20 to 24 thousandths. The second ring should have an end gap of 24 to 28 thousandths. And make a note in the instructions that the second ring gap always be larger than the top ring gap. Now that's been a new thing in the last 10 or 15 years or so, in that you're putting larger gaps in the second ring so that if there's any pressure built up between the rings, the pressure will actually just bleed down through the crankcase versus unseating the top ring, causing just more blow-by, which just makes things even worse and worse as you go. And the oil ring needs a gap of 10 thousandths minimum. So I got everything marked, got that down. Let me show you a couple of the tools I'm going to be using here. First of all, if I need, here's a piston ring filer. I don't need to do anything fancy, just a regular crank one works just fine. I've been using this for years and years. After you file the rings, you do need to smooth the edges, so I use a little India stone to go through and dress the edges of the piston rings. So there will be a sharp edge or a burr after you use this tool. So just smooth out the burr with this, and the motor will be happy. For checking the piston ring gap, I do have a piston ring gapping tool, which sets the piston ring about, looks like about 3/4 of an inch down the bore, and fits it perfectly square. So it's a good accurate way of checking piston rings. You can also, if you don't have one of those tools, if your piston is a flat top like this, you can actually just push the piston down, get it as level as evenly as you can. Sometimes what I'll do, let me show you on this rear cylinder here since it's closer to you. You can take, for example, the surface underneath the ring stack here that's milled flat, and just line that up with the very, very top of the cylinder as you push the rings in. Get it same side to side, pop it out. Use your feeler gauges, which I got right here. Use your feeler gauges to check your ring end gap. Very important. Okay, now I thought would be a good time to show you the difference in piston size and cylinder size between the stock 107 and the big bore 124. So the stock piston is 3.937 inches in diameter, and the new 124 inch is 4.250, so 4.25 inches. So actually this is the size of a standard big block Chevy piston now. The difference is, I don't even have to take the piston rings off this old piston. You can kind of see it goes in there with lots of room to spare. Or if I can get a nice little closer look at that. So there is your cylinder. Yeah, it's a world of difference there. I see the gap in there. So much, much bigger pistons. For the piston rings, they just give you the piston rings in a clear cellophane package. Some manufacturers will give you the piston rings divided up as far as top, second, and oil ring. These are just kind of put together in a package, but they're easy to identify, and they tell you in the instructions exactly how to identify them. So I don't know if it'll come up on camera here, but the top ring is the shiny one, and the second ring is the dull one. Also, the top ring also says, top on it. It makes it pretty easy, and plus the word top faces up. Now, for piston rings, if there's a bevel in the piston ring, and there is here, you probably can't see it, but there's a bevel. The bevel always faces up on a top ring and faces down on the second ring. What happens is combustion gases works its way in through that bevel there and pushes the piston ring out against the cylinder wall so it seals good. So on a compression stroke, really it's just your top ring that actually seals. The second ring is kind of a secondary oil scraper, really. So that one you want to seal when there's from the opposite direction, when there's pressure below the ring, and then it seals. And actually these are, oh boy, I forget the term for these. I think they're called Dykes rings. There's it's like a scraper built into the ring itself, which again faces downwards to scrape the excess oil off the cylinder. And again, there's also a dot that shows which way's up. So the dot always goes up. For top ring, second ring, if there's a dot, the dot always goes up. If you don't have the dots, then you can go by the bevels. And if there's nothing, no indicators, no markers whatsoever, then you can actually put the ring either way, and that's usually just applies to just the top ring. Then the oil ring itself, it's an expander, and set of rings here, scrapers, I guess. And the expander we never touch. We don't do anything with this. The only thing I notice is when you put these in the piston is that the ends here butt like that. And that's about it. They do say to measure the end gap on the oil rings. It says never ever to file them. I have filed these before because I've seen them too tight and they've worked out perfectly. So it's only been rare instances I've ever had to do that. We'll see how it works out here. So we'll start with the front cylinder. Again, using our cardboard stands on the bottom to protect that thin skirt. So we'll start with the top ring. I'll even put it in the direction that you want. There we go. All right. Just use your thumbs, pop it in, take the piston, and the friction of the piston ring will hold the piston up, so you don't have to worry about it falling through. And just really carefully go through, use your fingers, and get it perfectly level. Pop it out. Take your feeler gauges. Find the feeler gauge that you want to set these rings packs to. The range is 20 to 24 thousandths. I'm going to go right in the middle at 22. And I can already, just by looking at it, tell that I am definitely have to file these. These ring gaps are already almost touching. So, yeah. And all this feeler gauge does is you try to push it into the gap. There should be no drag to slight drag on it. Right now, you can't get it in because it's way too tight. So I actually like it that way. Then I can set these ring gaps to where I want to put them. So we're gonna go for 22 thousandths, which is right in the middle of the range. So to file these, you got these two pins here, and like a little flat surface to set the ring on. And I like to just file one side of the ring at a time. Get as square as possible, pushing against the pin, kind of squaring it up, and just lightly turn the crank, taking some material away. Now I do have an electric ring filer, and I'll use that on when I'm doing like V8s and that sort of thing. But just for doing two pistons in a Harley, I just use my hand crank. I like the hand crank. I can do just fine job with this. Seems like I was cranking a lot, wasn't it? But here we go. Sometimes it's a little scuff there. All right. And we put it back in and check. I can already tell it's still going to need more filing, but we'll measure to be sure. Oh yeah, you need a lot more. This one's going to take a lot. This gap is almost completely closed up on this ring. A lot of grinding. A lot more to go. Just inch up on it a little at a time. Okay, getting closer. Getting closer. We're almost there. Almost there. I know this isn't the most exciting thing, is watching me file fit rings, but it's a important part of engine building. Okay, feeler gauge, you probably can't see that from where you're at, but the feeler gauge just kind of sticks in there. It's pretty tight. It kind of holds itself in there. That's too tight. And it can't quite get it all the way to where it actually touches the cylinder. So we're really close. Really close. I'm going to get another thousandth or so left. I need to take just a hair off, more off of the outer edge than the inner edge, so I kind of angle it that way too. Alright, we'll see where we're at. And you might be thinking about all these metal shavings coming off of this, and yet that's a concern, so we make sure that we wash all these parts before putting them into the engine. Oh, boys. Just right there. Just a little bit more. We're almost right on top of it. And we're there. Maybe even just a hair tight still. We got a little bit of room to play with. So I aimed right for the middle of the range. I'm not afraid of going a little bit too big. Bigger's better than tight, so I'm going to go ahead and just take just the slightest amount off still. Just to make sure that we're where we should be. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Kind of pull it up, recenter it again, just make sure we got everything dialed in. Oh yeah. Slight drag. The edges of the ring look parallel. Don't be worried to spend some time with this stuff. Don't want to rush it. If you're not confident, just keep on rechecking. But this one looks pretty good. Beautiful. Very nice. Okay, so that one's done. Then we take a little India stone and we break any edges that are on there. It doesn't take much. Just enough to make sure that there's no sharp edges. And even the side that I didn't touch, I'll still kind of break that edge there just a hair. Want this engine to be happy. Sharp edges don't make engines happy. Okay, I think we got it. So, that one's finished. Move on to the next one, and then pretty much the rest of the process goes pretty much the same as that. Rings are filed and matched to each cylinder. Now we just wash and scrub and dry until everything's clean, and then we're ready to start assembly. So when you wash these cylinders, the rings, just go through the wash tank real quick, wipe them off, blow them dry, no big deal. Make sure we keep them separated for where they're at. Pistons, kind of the same thing. They're pretty clean anyways. The cylinder, you never know. S&S usually does a pretty good job washing them, but there's also a anti-rust coating in here. So we definitely need to put this in a solvent tank, dissolve that anti-rust coating, and go through with, actually I use, again, those blue shop towels. After I get out of the wash tank, I'll put it into a sink with just regular soap and water. I use dish soap and water on a blue shop towel, and I go in there and I really just go through it. I scrub and clean just like that, and then once I'm done with that, air it dry with an air hose as quickly as possible so no rust sets up. And once it's dry, I'll immediately get it to the bench, hose it down with some WD-40, and then I hose a rag down, again a blue shop towel, lint-free shop towel with WD-40, and I go through there and I wipe and I coat until I pull out the shop towel and there's no signs of any dirt or rust or any particulate on the shop towel. It should just look maybe wet from the WD-40, but otherwise it should be a clean shop towel. No matter how many times you got to go over that. You got to go over that 10, 12 times. You know, spraying, get a new shop towel, go in there, clean it. If it takes 10 or 12 times, then that's what you do. You go until it's clean. Usually it takes me at least 3 or 4. And I've gone, I know I've gone well beyond 10 before until I've gotten these things where I've been happy that they're perfectly clean. I actually like to put the piston rings on in a slightly different orientation, but we're going to use the S&S recommendation since this is an S&S kit. I just marked the tops of the pistons, so this little hash there with the pin boss is where the oil ring expander goes. This little slash here and this little slash here are for the top and bottom oil ring rails, and then the big lines there are for your top and second compression ring, and just got to make sure that they're 180 degrees apart. So I'll put the expander in first with the points facing up and butted right up against each other. I don't think I can get the camera to focus in on that. No, let's see if I can maybe kind of get the, I don't know if it's focusing, probably not. Oh well. But I'll put the oil ring expander on first. Just pops right on, that's the easiest one. And I'll make a check to make sure that it's not overlapped, that the expander is butted against each other. It's supposed to expand the oil rails outwards. So I'll put on the bottom oil rail on top of the expander, and it sits right in. Once that's in, that'll hold the expander in. There we go. And the top oil ring expander, or the top oil ring rail, I mean. There we go. And that's like 180 degrees off from the other one. There we go. Perfect. As long as I'm doing those, I'll go ahead and just do the same thing on the rear piston. Now these piston rings, especially these oil rings, are extremely small, very narrow. So you have to be very careful with them, especially when we go to install the cylinders over these pistons. It's very easy to snag and bend or crunch one of these rings. Okay. So we got our second compression ring. Make sure the dot is facing up. And just put it on with the ring expander here. Open it up just barely enough to fit over the piston top, and bam, pops right in. Just make sure that it moves around nice and easy. It's not snagged, spins, moves freely. That's good. Top ring, again, the top ring has got a dot and it says top right on top. Again, expand it just enough to barely make it over the piston. Ooh. There we go. There we go. And make sure that it sounds like that. And from there, these are going to move around on you, and I'm going to oil them and move around. But if you want to, you can always set your gaps from here. You just have to really check to make sure that the gaps are separated on these compression rings once you install the cylinders over the pistons. But for now, we can set the gaps where they should be. All right, again, second ring, dot facing up. Jiggles nice, moves around, spins perfectly fine. And the top compression ring. Let's see, yeah, top facing up, the word top facing up, the bevel facing up. I think we got it. There we go. Yeah. That's a good sound, that's what you want to hear. Right. And from here, what I'll do is add just a little bit of oil inside this oil ring expander, so it's got some lubrication in it upon first startup. Of course, we'll oil the cylinders in too when we put the cylinders on. Doesn't need a lot, to be honest, just a little bit. And I'll squirt just a little bit on the piston rings, and then it's kind of on the compression rings, and just kind of spin them around, get it lubed up, rub some on the skirt, that sort of thing. There you go. Do the other piston. We're going to be doubly sure that all these gaps or everything's lined up where they should be before we install the cylinders. Now we'll open our packages that have the piston pin clips. Pull those out. And I'll go ahead and put one clip in one side of the piston. There'll be some spring pressure on these, so it takes a little bit of practice, but these are pretty easy. There's other types that are more difficult, such as the spiral locks. And even those you can kind of get once you get the hang of them. Alright, so kind of what I like to do is decide which side do I want to approach the engine from to install the last clip. And for that, I think I want to work on that from I'm thinking the primary side, since I'll have a little bit more room and more access. So on the cam side, I'll go ahead and put a piston pin clip in. So I'll stick a pin in, just as something to back up against, and I'll aim for this clip to kind of come across this recess here, is where you can get your screwdriver and to pop the clip out. I want the clip, the pin clip, to overlap that by about 1/4 inch or so. So I'll put the top in first, towards the top crown of the piston. And it'll take a little bit of force to work it in, and kind of get in with your fingers a little bit, and then you use that little recess that you use to pop out the pistons with, the piston clip with, to pop them in. Okay, it took me a couple minutes to get that one in, but it's in, and I'll take the pin and just kind of make sure that it's clipped, so the clip is seated in its little recess there, and pop it, make sure it's snug, looks good. Go on to the next one. So now we can put these pistons on the rods. First, we'll lube them up. S&S did give us this engine assembly lube. I will first put this into the pin bores. Don't be shy. Get it all in there, rub it all around. The more the merrier. Other piston. We're going to do the rods too. There we go. Try to lube up the pins. Don't be shy with the stuff. There's plenty to go around. You're going to have a lot left over when you're done with this project. So put that on the shelf and keep it for other things. Make sure you got the right piston, front on front, rear for rear. We orient it the correct direction, so we have the little dot that says cam towards the cam side. We'll get the pin started in the piston. You put the piston over the rod, push the pin the rest of the way through till you hear it hit home, and there it is. Remember, we've got to keep our protectors on. So their head bolt protectors are now essential for making sure that there's no marks that ever go into this brand new piston. Get our pin started on the one side. We're going to make sure the orientation is correct. We've got the cam dot next to the cam side of the engine. Push the pin in. Now we have to put the other clips in. That's why we have our newspaper here, so if the clip drops, it just drops onto the newspaper. We have to be sure to pull the newspaper out once we, before we put the cylinders on. So let me get the other clips. Yeah, it's kind of tough when everything is this slippery. And like I said, these clips are particularly strong. Almost. Ow. There we go. Got one in. And check to make sure that it's in the groove all the way. You can even push on your screwdriver to push it towards the pin. Look at it from the side to make sure that it looks symmetrical as far as how much of the clip is sticking out above the groove. That one looks good. All right. Just one more. Okay, first we'll take our base gaskets from our kit. They're labeled up, so pretty sure that means up. So usually you can get these right over our head bolt protectors. Very good. And up. And just kind of make a little check, make sure that the oil drain black holes are uncovered and everything's sitting good. Everything seems to be fine. Perfect. Okay, the only way this works is if you have a piston ring compressor that opens up so you can take it off around the connecting rod once you get the cylinder over the piston. So first you're going to put a little bit of oil on the piston, put a little bit of oil on this, make sure everything is slick and lubed up. Now this is actually the set of pliers that clamps piston ring compressor. You carefully slide it over the piston rings after you again checked the orientation, which I just did. So the orientation of the piston rings is right where you want it. And you slowly squeeze, making sure that everything moves freely. Even give it a little wiggle, and popped off. Right. You don't want any pinching. I can still move the rings around a little bit. And then make it as level as you possibly can, and it should ratchet itself not super tight, but pretty snug on the piston. Now that the piston and rings are protected, we can pull off our cylinder stud protectors. Now the cylinder, I'm going to just add just a couple little squirts of oil. I'm going to rub the oil around in there. Not a lot, just enough to kind of give a coating of oil to the cylinders. And I'm going to come back and we're going to try to install the cylinders over these pistons. Got it. Fine. Took a little bit. So now that the cylinder's down over the piston, you got to get a way to get the piston ring compressor off. So that's why you have to have one that comes apart like that. Okay, first one's done. Sometimes, like what I like to do, especially if I'm having one that I've been kind of fighting with a little bit, is I'll go underneath the piston, or underneath the cylinder with a flashlight light and a little mirror. Now check to make sure that the piston rings, that oil ring didn't pop out and fold over. I've actually had that happen once. With those thin rings, you can get the cylinder down over the piston and oil ring, and the oil ring is kinked and bent and stuck in between the cylinder and the piston. I think this one is fine. And let's just see how it goes down. All right, slides down just fine. I think we're good. Little wiggle. And we're down. Okay. Okay, so here's a couple of cylinder retainers. So it just kind of screws on. Just need one, just need enough just to hold it down so it doesn't move while we're messing with the front cylinder here. And this one I got a little bit more room, but it doesn't always mean it's going to be easier. Alright, so I think we got it. Go. Pop the piston ring compressor out of there. And we just gently wiggle and push, wiggle and push. Pretty much just falls right into place at that point. They seem like low drag rings. Like if I was building the small block Chevy race motor, it feels like about the same amount of drag on the pistons or on the rings as that would have. So, okay. Make sure these are our little hold downs are tight. The transmission is still in gear, 6th gear. So I'm going to use the tire to rotate the motor over. I'm just going to go slowly and make sure that everything moves freely. No pressure. Looks great. Go over a couple times, put the cylinders at the bottom of the bore and just kind of check again to make sure we're not getting any kind of weird scratches or anything abnormal happening. There could have been a piece of grit in there. You don't know. It's good to check. I check and double check when I do engines. I don't take anything for granted. And everything looks great. Everything looks great. Okay, now that we have the cylinders on, time to put in these little dowels. These are the cylinder head locating dowels. These actually slip right in pretty easy. The twin cam ones, I know you got to hammer in. And I've had a couple of these I had to kind of give a little tap, but these are actually slipping right in just with my fingers. Let's give a couple of taps, make sure that they're in all the way. Actually, it seems fine. Here's the head gasket. Kinetic multi-layer shim head gaskets. And for these, they can go either way. Up, down, doesn't matter. Let's locate those in the dowels. Ready for the heads. Okay, I already got the heads all cleaned off. Of course, you got to remove the head gaskets and the head gasket or material from the cylinder head. I'll go into another video about how I clean and condition engine parts for assembly another time, but just real quick for the head gasket, I just use a razor blade and a little holder like this to scrape, lightly scrape to get rid of the head gasket. And then after that, if I need to, I'll just go really, really lightly, and I can't express that enough, really lightly with one of these tools through my air grinder. Of course, this is a really, really soft, kind of more of a plastic, little bristly thing, and it doesn't take any metal away, but it will take any remnants of the gasket away and give you a nice surface finish that kind of looks, just like that. And you just use it very, very lightly, and it works just fine. What you don't want to use is a gasket removing pad, kind of a scouring pad, because that will remove metal if you're not careful. Now, I've used these before and had success with them, but you have to again go very, very lightly. But ever since I started using these like plastic bristly things, they're very soft. This works great. So, all right. So now back to installing the heads. I just start with the rear first because it doesn't matter. I just start with the rear. So everything is cleaned, dried. I did put these through the solvent tank, gave them a quick rinse in the solvent tank, washed them, rinsed them with water, dried them off, blow them dry with an air gun, and added oil to where I needed the oil to be. For example, the valve stems, the guide, seals, all that kind of stuff. So just slip it right over the dowel pins, and that's pretty much how easy the head goes on. Carefully line it up, kind of watch where the dowel is in the dowel hole. It pops right on. Next are these head bolts. And can't get the focus. So what I'll do is I'll actually take an oil can and I'll just put one little bit of, a couple drops of oil on the threads here, kind of, tilt it up to let it run down, and just a little smear of oil underneath the head here before I install them onto the studs. So let's go ahead and do that. A little oil, a little oil, and then you can even wipe a little bit of oil right on the cylinder head here, or that shoulder touches the head, so we're not getting any like bare metal to metal dry contact. We want torques to be smooth and even and consistent to make sure you have even pressure holding the cylinder head in. Just head bolts in. And you usually can run them down with your fingers. If you have to use a little wrench, run them down, that sort of thing. Okay, now we're going to come down to torquing the cylinder head bolts. So I've run them down with my fingers, but just, finger tight, that's it. So the service manual, the Harley-Davidson service manual, says you torque to a certain spec, and then you add an additional 90 degrees to the bolt. That's standard for Harleys. No, S&S has their own procedure, so I will use the S&S procedure. So the procedure is to tighten each bolt in the correct pattern, from 10 foot-pounds to 20 foot-pounds to 30 foot-pounds. Fully loosen each bolt 1/4 turn at a time in the reverse sequence. Then tighten each bolt from 10 foot-pounds, 20 foot-pounds, 25 foot-pounds, 30 foot-pounds, 35 foot-pounds, and then finally 45 foot-pounds. And it says wait 15 minutes, then recheck each bolt at 45 foot-pounds using the same sequence. Well, I guess I'll get started. Okay, I've been torquing this cylinder head down for a while. Now we're up to 40 foot-pounds. Apologize for my squeaky shoes. I'm going to pull steady and smooth. You want the torque wrench to click in mid-pull, not at the end of the pull. Just like that. Just like that. Okay. Final sequence. Okay, we'll go through and click them all, make sure we got it. And we've ended up at 45 foot-pounds as per the instructions in the S&S manual. Okay, now gotta wait 15 minutes. 15 minutes, and then we do a quick retorque. I'd be surprised if they actually moved it all, but we'll find out. Okay, with this 124 big bore kit, we are also going to install a Screaming Eagle 64mm throttle body. Now the original throttle body was, I believe, 55 millimeters. Could be wrong on that, but I think it's 55. And the intake itself is plastic. The new Screaming Eagle 64 is 64mm blade and has a aluminum intake manifold. And actually, if you rotate to the underside of it, it actually says it is says Mikuni cast right into the bottom of it. So I'm guessing that Mikuni does the castings for these. So that's wonderful. To look at the difference between the stock, I believe 55, and the Giant 64, there you go. You can kind of see how big the difference is. That's a lot more airflow, which is kind of what these M8s need, is more airflow. Now the new Scream Eagle does not comes bare, so you have to put in the sensors, injectors, and all that kind of stuff. We are going to also install the fueling 6.1 gram per second injectors, but I will still need to steal the fuel rail and fuel line off of this, as well as the map sensor. So let's remove those. Off the stock unit. Sometimes the O-ring grabs pretty good. The O-ring looks to be in good shape. I'm just going to put just a little bit of oil on it. Just the slightest amount, so none drips down by the sensor. I don't know if it matters or not, but why risk it? Just put a little bit of oil on, just needs enough to help it slide in and seal into the new unit. Just like that. Take our bolt. I'll use just the tiniest dab of blue Loctite. And screw that in. No need to torque it down, just get it good and snug. There we go. All right. Now to remove the fuel rail off of the stock intake manifold. Those around there pretty snug. And should just pop right off. There we go. Wasn't too bad. I'll pop the stock injectors out. Those O-rings are holding pretty good. There we go. And some fuel might drip out when you do that. That's fine, just let it drip out. There we go. Twist, it pops out. There we go. Whew. Those have been in there for a while. Okay, before installing our new injectors, I'm going to make sure that everything is clear, that there's no sharp edges, don't want to tear the O-ring on any burrs or anything like that. Everything's smooth, all the machine work looks good. There's no dirt, there's no grime, there's no ridge, no nothing, so everything looks perfect on these parts. Now, what I use to lubricate these O-rings is actually some of this Cable Life cable lube. You can use motor oil, maybe just a small bit of motor oil. I like this stuff because it's slippery and it's really thin. And if any of this does get into the fuel system itself, the gasoline will quickly dissolve it, wash it away, and it doesn't seem to affect anything. So just a little bit, just a tiny amount. Spread it around the O-rings, make the O-rings slick, lubed up. Take what's left on my fingers and just kind of rub in here, get all these lubed up. There we go. Okay. Okay, obviously the spray nozzle, which is where the red O-ring is at. When you look at it, it's pretty obvious which is the spray nozzle. Spray nozzle goes down inside the intake. So I'll actually stick the other end into the fuel rail. There's a little plastic clip that lines up with it. Kind of helps lock it in place. Just that easy. Now to get these in, you might have to kind of pinch these in a little bit, and it'll go in. So I'll kind of start with one side, pinch the other one in, and it just pops in pretty much that easy. And give it one final squeeze, and it pops down, and it hits solid. So that's it. That's all there is to it. Other than I put it on backwards. Okay. Well, popping it off is just as easy. I'm paying attention to the camera, not paying attention to what I'm doing. All right, so the bolt holes should line up with the bolts, and the fuel line should go away from the intake manifold. So let's try that again. Start one end, pinch the other end so it pops in. Again, just pops down, just like that. Very little pressure, doesn't take much. All right, well now I got it down on the correct way. Just make sure everything's good, lined up. Put our bolts in. And snug these down. I don't torque these. But just by feel, I imagine it's probably like 80 to 90 inch-pounds or so. So it's, there we go. And that's it. And this is ready to install on the bike. If you want to, from what you can do here is stick the intake manifold flanges on and the intake seals. Now the intake seals, I will rub a little bit of axle grease on. So I'll get a little smear of the high-tech axle grease, general grease, just kind of lube them up. This will help them slide into place easier and not pull or pinch or anything. So on earlier models of Harleys, there was a front and rear clamp. These are universal. There's no front or rear, so just slip these on with the tapered portion facing out. Those go on first. And then the O-ring itself has a taper to it. That taper goes towards the intake manifold where the taper of the flange is at. We're ready to install. Okay, the lower rocker cover has an O-ring in the bottom, so those are real easy to put in place. You just take the new O-ring, just pat it right down in that groove, and go around, like so. It fits pretty snug so it doesn't fall out. It's actually nice setup. There we go. Just like that. I'm going to fish through the compression release wire. And just kind of slide it on in. Drops right down, just like that. And this one's ready to go in. There we go. Okay, now I can torque these in place. Just use a simple X pattern. I do these in steps. So total torque is like 100 to 120 inch-pounds, I think. Let's see here. Yeah, 90 to 120 inch-pounds. Again, I'm using my inch-pound torque wrench. And I'll start at for like 50. So do one there. Those inner ones actually creep towards 150 inch-pounds. Now just go through and check, make sure they're all good. Good. Good.